So we'll start out and label our axes. Our y-axis, remember prices always rise. And our x-axis, instead of the traditional P's and Q's quantity, this is going to look across the economy as a whole, and so the quantity is going to be the total production of goods and services within the economy, and therefore Q, or the quantity, is going to be GDP, gross domestic product, which is a measure of all the goods and services produced in an economy during a span of time, like a year. So this is our basic layout, and what we're going to do is we're going to, these are aggregate curves, we're going to look at the aggregate or overall economy-wide supply curve and the economy-wide demand curve. Now the supply curve goes something like this, and then it hits, so it's fairly flat, and then it hits an elbow, and then it goes almost straight up. So this is the aggregate supply. So this is the ability of the economy as a whole to produce the goods and services. And what this tells you is that for a long span of time here, the economy can produce more, and prices won't really rise. So think of it as, in here there are a lot of empty factories and unemployed workers. And indeed this area along from, say, here to here is referred to as underemployment. Now, when we get over here, what's happening is that everybody has a job, and all the factories are working absolutely to their maximum capacity. And so instead of being able to produce more, the economy is basically at its limit. If you are over in this area and you try and make the economy go faster, you'll just cause prices to rise. So, like the workers will shift from one company to another and get pay raises, or the price of capital goods will get very, very expensive. So this area from here to here we call overheating. And the problem with this area is that if you get over here in the supply curve, the aggregate supply curve, you really end up in a situation where prices are rising, but no more stuff is being created. And when prices rise and there's no more stuff, all that's happening is just everything's getting more expensive. The term for that is inflation. Okay, so you've got underemployment, overheating, and this area, the elbow, is basically the area of full employment. So this is where everyone has a job, the factories are producing at capacity, but things aren't stretched too far. And when you're a policymaker, your goal is going to be to operate the economy there in that level of full employment. So when we put the aggregate demand curves in, we're going to want an aggregate demand curve that comes in right around there. And the way I try to help people remember that is that you can put two imaginary eyeballs in here, and I hope you can see a little bit of a happy face there at that area of full employment at that elbow. And that is the target that policymakers go after as they try to adjust the economy. Now, that's aggregate supply. It's a supply and demand model. So you have aggregate demand as your other curve. And aggregate demand is D demand downward sloping. and it can be downward sloping anywhere along here. And it represents, the collective demand curves of all the people in the economy. So the higher prices are, the less stuff they're interested in. And then as you drop prices, then they become interested in more stuff. So that's what that is. If the aggregate demand curve then slopes down here, then the equilibrium for the economy output would be here. We'll call it GDP E for equilibrium, and the price level would be here. Price at equilibrium. And at this point, you can see that this economy is underperforming. You're in an area of underemployment. The factories are not producing at capacity. There are unemployed workers. So in this situation, you might want to stimulate the economy, try and make the economy go faster, move it along the aggregate supply curve, move the aggregate demand curve to the right. So you take some measures and you go too far. If the aggregate demand curve is over here, well, you've increased, now your equilibrium is down here somewhere, GDPE. So you're making more stuff, but look what's happened to prices. Prices have shot up. So you're in a situation where you have a great deal of inflation, and that's not so good. Obviously, the game here is that you want to organize your economy so that the aggregate demand curve passes right through the aggregate supply curve at that point of full employment, right through the happy place, and we'll call that aggregate demand target. And at that point, you're getting plenty of GDP, more GDP than when you're in this would be a recession down here, or when you're in a high inflation period. And your price level, while prices are a little bit higher than they were during the recession, prices are not getting ridiculous. And that point of intersection is where policymakers want to be running the economy.